Thank you. So just quickly in terms of the partnership, why I joined the program. Unfortunately, I couldn't get Chris's input on that, and also that I reached what I wanted to do with the partnership. So, and then I'd like to share just maybe a little bit more on Luckhoff. It's a very brief and small case study of Luckhoff versus or compared to a lot of the schools in the country, just to highlight some issues, and also things that I've realized in the Winelands 7 that I'd just like to share, and then just commitment going forward. I think I definitely didn't achieve over the year what I would have liked to through the partnership. So I think it's a long-term commitment, and I think if I suppose all the other business leaders and principals will agree that a year is actually very short to achieve the goals, especially in the education environment where things do not necessarily change as quickly as we'd like to see the change. So I think this partnership is definitely something which we need to commit for a long term, not necessarily only for a year. So in terms of the partnership, so Luckhoff High School in Idas Valley, it's a Quintile 4 school. Chris Joost is the principal. They've got about 1,010 learners in the school. And myself from the D6 group, who joined or who engaged on this journey since the beginning of the year. Maybe just before I avail that slide, just in brief background, I'm from the private education sector. I've been involved in education since 2010, primarily through PSG group that established new private schools through the Kiro group that I suppose all of you know fairly well, and then also other private education ventures. And I think the concern and frustration that I always had in that space, although there's obviously room for private sector and schools and private schools in the country, was that I always had the ambition to rather support and fix the current. There's a lot of infrastructure invested in education. There's a lot of schools that's already operating in the country. And I think from a private sector perspective, it was also always an ambition to rather focus on the current schools that's already available and that's there. And let's rather support them as far as we can through, I suppose, clever ventures, because from a business and private sector perspective, one needs to build sustainability through profitability. But as opposed to building new, I think we've got 27,000 schools in the country, and if we can manage to support those schools to operate effectively and act as proper small services businesses serving our learners and our and parents, then I think we're sitting on the right track, as opposed to ignoring the 27,000 public schools in the country that's struggling because of lack of focus and lack of investment from the private sector. And rather, let's go and build new ones. Let's go and build new private schools for profit. Yes, there is a space for that, but I think there's a massive obligation from private sector to rather focus on the current and fix the current. Not fix the principles, not that something's broken, but enable them to operate more effectively. So that's the reason why I left the private school arena and PSG and joined the company called D6 Group, where our core focus is to service schools and to help schools to operate more effectively. I think the one thing that is ironic for me through the whole Partners for Possibility journey was that no school has on their threats or weaknesses ineffective management. None of them even mentioned it anywhere. It was always rather a case of, which is not wrong, but rather a case of learner-centric, which is right, but no one ever focused on, and it's almost as if we're oblivious towards how inefficient we are. And I'm throwing a blank canvas across this, not pointing fingers towards the principals, but I think the concern that we as D6 Group have within schools in general is that if we ask anyone in the country, what is a school, you would refer to the teacher and the learners. We don't really understand and fathom the complexity of management and what school principals have to go through to manage this complex organization. If we compare schools to any other services business, schools have a very complex client base. It's the parent and it's the teacher and the parents and the learners. They've got a complex staff complement. I mean, most of the schools have about 40, 50 staff that they need to manage. It's a lot of people. HR, performance management processes that needs to be implemented. And then the curriculum, which is the product and the actual service that we provide to the client. And I'm making this a very impersonal thing, but technically school is a services organization that needs to provide a very complex product and a complex service to the end user, which is the learner. And we sometimes, in my view, both the public and the private sectors tend to forget about the importance of sound management and fixing and innovating from the core of the school, from a managerial perspective, and let that flow out into the classroom. If we take a services business as an example, the first thing we need to do is get the right people on board from a managerial perspective, and ensure that management have the proper equipment in terms of capability and skill to manage that business in an effective manner. You can have a very diluted and dilapidated product with a very good management team. You can still build a successful business, whether it's for profit or not. But if you do not have the capability from a managerial perspective, you can have the best product that you can get your hands on. That business will not be successful. So I think that's from a D6 business. That's our philosophy, and our drive is to invest in the education space to make a difference in schools through provision of that's our passion, managerial platforms, in order to at least, that's a small portion of the whole solution, but at least enable school principals and management to have access to sound data, because otherwise you can't make decisions. And secondly, I think if we look at private sector involvement and also departmental involvement, how we innovate how we bring innovation into schools is, let's throw tablets to the classroom and let's put whiteboards in the class, and a lot of innovation between what's happening between the teacher and the learner. But our managerial competence is very old age, and it's a blanket canvas or a blanket statement that I'm making. I know a lot of schools do not operate in that way, but that's a concern that we've seen. We service 2,500 more affluent schools, former Model C and private schools within D6, and even in them, it's a major issue. But it's as if we're a bit oblivious towards the importance of management, but we rather focus on what happens in the classroom. So anyway, that's why I joined D6, because of that philosophy, in order to fix current. And I think the journey with Partners for Possibility was a slap bang, rude awakening, or a warm fuzzy feeling that they share exactly the same not vision. They start with the principal as the head of this organization, which is exactly what it is. I mean, all the principals here, you are the custodian of managing that school as an effective organization to, at the end of the day, provide quality education to the learners. That is the outcome, and that's the core intent of all of this. Partners for Possibility, which was focusing on the principal, where D6 focusing on providing the principal and management with the platform, was in our view a good symbiosis. Is that the right? What symbiosis? So that's why I joined the program. I think also important, we had to make a sustainable contribution to education in South Africa. Not only building something which is dependent on donor funding, but building a business that we can actually contribute to education in a profitable manner, because that generates continuity. But not necessarily jeopardizing the school to pay for something, but rather leveraging off communities and income that can be generated outside the school in order to fund the school for that platform. As I've mentioned, we focus on school management, which is a very good fit with the whole Partners for Possibility program, to enable the principals to start to think about data management and school management as a primary, or as one of the primary roles that they're responsible for. And I think a very important thing, the whole private sector, as I mentioned, we always focus on the more affluent schools, Model C and the private sector. And we tend to forget about the lower quintile schools and the schools that are resource stricken. And I think that's where our partnership with Partners for Possibility is a core focus, that we give a large discount on the products that we provide, and the rationale for not 100% discount, we can give it for free, but as soon as you give something for free, then it's shelved. There must always be some form of responsibility and accountability for something that's implemented. And PFP allowed me to gain a better understanding of the poorer, or the lower resourced schools and the environment, in order to ensure that we've got the capability to then adopt our offering and our product to also cater for that market. My ambition, eventually, one day, should be that the likes of Luckhoff should be able to tackle the likes of Paul Roos head on, not on the sports field, but in terms of effective school management, effective and informed parents, so that the likes of Luckhoff and any of the Partners for Possibility schools can actually approach them, or that the parents of the richer and more affluent schools are actually jealous because of the connectivity and the effectiveness of less resource schools. School management and effective school management should not be a competitive edge in schools. That should be a hygiene factor, and it should be effective. That we can rather focus on the learning aspects and ignore the management because it's effective. Currently we ignore management because we think it's effective, but it's the unknown unknowns, and that's why we don't challenge it. So did I reach my goal during 2018? Not at the least. I think, unfortunately, our partnership was not as effective as I would have hoped, and I think that's why I'm envious of the double D partnership, and I think I want to congratulate you on a showcase of how things can be done if you've got buy-in of both parties, and commitment of both parties. I think it's something that all PFP participants should strive for. So thanks for die vlaggie en harte vooruit. Well done for making it difficult for us to even try to compete. Not that it's a competition, but anyway. I think your input in terms of what you've done and how you've done it is valuable for PFP also, because I think I could also use a lot of what you've done. I don't know what you've done and how you've managed to do this, but I would like to know what you've done so that I can replicate it in my partnership with Chris in the long run. And we did, at least, I think from a Luckhoff perspective, manage to implement or conclude the implementation of D6 Plus. I know it's subjective, it's our own product, so it might sound as if I'm trying to punt that. That's not the case. I think what I'd really want to prove is that good management is possible in resource-stricken schools if you have access to sound management platforms. I think that's what I want to prove, so that we can go to the department and say, this is a major focus point. Because if you think about the Western Cape as an example, the WCED do not necessarily focus on enabling you and providing you with sound management platforms. They give you CMIS, where you capture results, but it's a database. It's not a school management platform. So to try and manage this complex organization, you're not given anything. You're not given the tools to actually do it. So we expect that you provide, or that as custodians of the schools, as principals, that you steer the ship in an effective manner. But the complexity of it makes it almost impossible to do that, especially, I think, from a principal perspective in terms of the training, etc., that has been provided to you, and the tools that have been provided to you. So I think there's a massive focus from a WCED perspective to ensure that that there's a major managerial focus to support principals, not only from a teaching perspective, but also from a technology perspective. So I'm committed, looking forward to 2019, to steal your ideas, to see how I can rekindle the relationship. But at least I've got the opportunity now to really see what the challenges are for poorer resource-stricken schools to utilize our software and then change things so that we can actually get to a position where all 27,000 schools have access to sound management platforms. Luckhoff resource. So this is something that, just out of interest. So what I've done, before everyone go and look at the numbers. So what I've done is we service approximately 500 schools on our full integrated managerial platform. So primarily former Model C schools. We do have a couple of no-fee schools that have implemented the package, but primarily it's former Model C and the private sector. Now, I've taken the averages across our entire user base, so we know how many educators they have, support staff, everything about the school. And I've just compared it with Luckhoff. So I've taken on average 1,000 learners. What do those schools look like within our environment, former Model C and private, compared to the likes of Luckhoff? And the findings was that, before I go into the numbers, is that from a managerial perspective, these poor resource schools are even more jeopardized in terms of school admin and management, in terms of resources that they have available compared to the more affluent schools. And in any situation, if you have a lack of resource, then efficiency is core. to ensure that you can actually generate more out of less resource. But in poorer resource schools, I think efficiency is something which we don't necessarily have the capability to drive because of access to funding and access to platforms, etc. So it's even a bigger issue. It's just almost like a snowball effect. So if we take Luckhoff as an example, so the green is the former Model C and private sector, which we service. Management is 7 managerial positions that they have versus 3 in the likes of Luckhoff. Admin is 6 versus the likes of Luckhoff is 3. It's literally 50% less. Cleaning and maintenance is 63% less. Other, which is security, etc., that's almost the same. You've got a security guard at the gate, etc. Finance is also half the resource available. And then teaching is 34% less. So I think this was it was an interesting thing for me to see that although poorer resource schools do not have access to sound management platforms, they are even further jeopardized by a massive decrease in available staff to actually run this whole complex organization, which even further exemplifies the need to implement or to use technology, not throw people at the problem, because to all of a sudden throw additional extra capacity, it will solve certain elements, but even the biggest corporates with 100,000 people, the ShopRites and Checkers, 130,000 employees, they will also say, we don't have enough people. So it's thinking to use technology to enable people to be more effective as opposed to throwing more resources to the problem. So and again, in poorer resource schools, I think that was evident through the study. You don't necessarily have the know-how and capability to manage these debtors in a more effective manner. I'm not saying it is possible. I'm just from a numbers perspective, if we can manage to get the school to decrease that debtors book by 10%, it'll mean 250,000 Rand more funding for you as a school per annum. But what we do is we ignore the debtors because we don't necessarily understand and fathom the complexity and know what to do with that. So just leave that because we can't really do much about it. So let's go throw massive amounts of energy into fundraising because that is where we think we can actually start generating cash. But to generate 250,000 Rand worth of money through fundraising as opposed to let's think of clever ways of how to manage debtors better, just by a 10% decrease, we eradicate a lot of the stuff. So I'm not saying it's an easy solution. It's just the factual things that we find that is even more problematic in poorer resource schools than in your more affluent schools. So going forward, as I've mentioned, I'm looking forward to see what changes we can make at Luckhoff and contributions from the implementation of the platform, and that it's a long-term partnership. So looking forward to 2019 and to steal some of the Double D's ideas of how to implement a successful partnership. So thanks, Jessica, for your contribution, and PFP, Double D's, and the Winelands group. I must say it's an incredible family that we've managed to build, which hopefully will continue in the new year. So thank you.
Good. Thank you so much.